Hey, welcome to The Explainer. We have this idea that anyone can sue anyone else for pretty much any reason. But what if I told you that the courthouse has a locked door, and you need a very specific key to get inside? Today, we are diving into a really interesting case that was stopped in its tracks, all because of one crucial legal idea.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. Imagine this. Can a religious group sue a state over a law that hasn't actually hurt anyone yet, but they're convinced it's only a matter of time before it does? It's a fascinating question, right? And it sets up this big showdown between religious freedom and the fundamental rules of the legal system.
All right, let's set the stage. The two sides in this legal fight are, well, they're about as different as you can get. On one side, you have the Satanic Temple, which is a religious organization based out of Massachusetts, and on the other side, the state of Indiana, which is defending a brand new law just passed.
So here's the quick play-by-play. Back in September 2022, Indiana's new law kicks in. Almost immediately, the Satanic Temple files a lawsuit. But the case gets tossed out by a district court, and then just recently a federal appeals court said, yep, we agree. Now the really important thing to get here is that the courts never even decided if the law violated their religion. They never even got through the front door.
And this slide really gets to the core of what the fight was about. On the left, you've got the Satanic Temple's third tenet, which is all about bodily autonomy. They said that Indiana's law, which makes it so a doctor has to be physically in the room to provide abortion medication, was a direct attack on this core belief and what they called their satanic abortion ritual. You can see it right there, a total clash of principles.
So, if the court didn't rule on the religious part, what did it rule on? Well, it all came down to this one little concept called legal standing. And this is the key we were talking about, the key that unlocks the courthouse door. If you don't have it, your case is dead on arrival. To put it simply, standing just means you have to prove you have a real personal stake in the outcome of the case. You can't just sue because you think a law is a bad idea. The law has to have affected you in some real, concrete way. You gotta have some skin in the game.
And to prove you have this standing, you have to clear 3 hurdles. First up, you need an injury in fact. That means a real, actual harm, not a what-if scenario. Second, you have to show causation, that the person you're suing is the one who actually caused your harm. And third, redressability. You have to show the court that if you win, it will actually fix the problem. As we're about to see, the Satanic Temple's lawsuit stumbled on that very first step.
So the entire case really just boiled down to one single question. Could the Satanic Temple prove that any of its members had actually been hurt by Indiana's law? This is where their argument gets pretty interesting, and, well, it's also where the court drew a very firm line in the sand.
Okay, so the temple came at this from 2 angles to try and prove an injury. First, they made a numbers argument. They basically said, look, we have so many members in Indiana, it's a statistical certainty that somebody is eventually going to become involuntarily pregnant and get harmed by this law. Their second argument was for something called a stigmatic injury, the idea that the law itself sends a message that their beliefs are wrong or invalid, and that harms every single member.
Now, what was the basis for that whole statistical argument? This number right here, 11,000. That's about how many members they said they had in Indiana. Their whole case was really built on the idea that with a group that big, a future injury wasn't just a possibility, it was a probability. They even had an expert testify that out of those 11,000 members, more than 10,000 of them could become involuntarily pregnant. So their point was, hey, this isn't some hypothetical risk. For our group as a whole, it's almost a certainty. But the question for the court was a big one. Can you actually build a whole lawsuit on a statistic?
Well, the appeals court had a very quick and very clear answer to that. No way. In a pretty powerful statement, the court said that this whole statistical argument completely ignores clear instructions from the Supreme Court. You can't just find standing with statistics. You have to point to an actual person who has been harmed.
Okay, so let's break down the court's final ruling. The judges basically took the Satanic Temple's arguments apart piece by piece, and they came to the conclusion that they just hadn't proven that necessary personal stake in the whole thing.
And the court's reasoning was super direct. They said, look, the Satanic Temple couldn't name a single member in Indiana who was pregnant and was actually being blocked by this law. Any talk about a future member being harmed was just guesswork. That stigmatic injury claim, way too vague. And hey, since the temple doesn't even run a clinic in Indiana, the law wasn't actually stopping them from doing anything. It all added up to one thing: no standing. Case dismissed.
Now, I know this might all sound like some dry, boring legal technicality, but this idea of standing is actually one of the most important principles in our entire legal system. It literally defines what kind of fights can even happen in a courtroom.
At its core, standing is a gatekeeper. It makes sure that our courts are in the business of solving real, actual disputes between people, not just serving as a stage to debate political disagreements or big philosophical questions. The whole idea is to keep the courts focused on what they're supposed to be doing, resolving actual cases and controversies.
And that leaves us with a huge, fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? This whole case brings up a real tension. Should the courthouse doors only swing open for people who can prove they've been personally and concretely harmed? Or, when a law deals with something as big as religious freedom, should groups be able to challenge it for everyone, even before one specific person gets hurt? It's a question about what we want our courts to be, and there is no easy answer.